Hey guys, Mention Master Studios here. How y'all doing? So, in case you guys don't know, Season 11 came out 4 years ago, and I'm sure as you guys know, when Season 11 was first released, this season was pretty divisive to say the least, with a lot of fans really not liking the season. However, there's something interesting that I've noticed as time has gone on. One thing that I've noticed is that a lot more Ninjago fans have actually started to look at Season 11 in a much more positive way, and I've seen a lot of Ninjago fans praising Season 11 for one reason or another. So in today's video, I decided that I wanted to take a look back at Season 11 and ask the big question. Did this season really deserve all the hate that it got when it first came out? Or was this season actually really good the entire time? And in case it isn't obvious by the title of this video, I think that Season 11 is really good. I honestly really enjoy Season 11, and I feel like this season honestly did a lot of really good things for the Ninjago franchise. And in today's video, I wanted to review the season for you guys and explain why I personally really like this season. So, let's get into this whole thing. So, for starters, just like all my reviews, I'm going to start off by going over the stuff that I liked, and then I'm going to go over the stuff that I didn't like. And starting off with the stuff that I liked, I'm going to talk about the ninja. Because I honestly feel like when it comes to the ninja during Season 11, they were all handled really well in one way or another during the season. Except for Jay. Jay was the only real exception, mainly because he didn't really get anything during Season 11. Although, to be fair, I don't really have a big problem with this, mainly because the next season after Season 11, Prime Empire, is a Jay-focused season. So Jay not getting that much in this season, like I said, isn't a big deal to me, because the next season is his season. But when it comes to the other five ninja, I honestly feel like each of them were handled really well during this season in one way or another. For starters, we have Kai, and this is the season that features Kai's infamous Powerless storyline, and although there are some changes that I would have made to the storyline, I feel like overall, this storyline that Kai got is actually pretty good, and I honestly think that it's one of the better storylines that Kai has gotten when it comes to the show. When it comes to this storyline, it starts off with Kai losing his powers after Asphira gets unleashed, and as a result of Kai losing his powers, he really isn't happy. Mainly because, as a result of him not having powers, Kai feels like he can't do as much in order to help out the rest of the team. All the other ninja have powers and they can all do stuff in order to help out people. Meanwhile, when it comes to Kai, he feels useless in comparison to all of them because he doesn't have powers. He feels like he can't help out as many people in comparison to the rest of the team. That is until Jake is able to inspire Kai, and he ends up coming to the realization that even though he doesn't have powers, that doesn't mean that he still isn't a hero, and he can still do things even if he doesn't have his powers. And that's exactly what we see. For the rest of the Fire chapter, Kai does whatever he can in order to help out his friends, even though he doesn't have his powers, and he's still able to help them out in his own way. And when it comes to the Fire chapter, I feel like it handles Kai's powerless storyline pretty well. But then we get the Ice chapter, and this takes Kai's storyline in a very interesting direction. During the Ice chapter, Kai slowly starts to regain his powers, and in the process, he slowly starts to turn back into the Kai that we all know. That is until the Ice Dragon Boreal attacks the fishing village, and Kai does whatever he can in order to save the villagers, but he's barely able to do anything. And after Boreal's attack, Kai feels extremely guilty over the whole situation. His elemental powers weren't enough to save everyone, and when it comes to Kai, he feels devastated as a result of that, causing Kai to come to the realization that even if he does have his powers, that's not always going to be enough. He can't always rely on his powers in order to get himself out of situations, and he needs to do things in order to help out, which I think is something pretty interesting. For a long time when it comes to the show, we've often seen Kai rely on his elemental powers in order to get himself out of situations, so I honestly think it's pretty interesting to see a storyline revolving around Kai realizing that he's more than just his powers, and he can do things all on his own. And this entire storyline comes to a very satisfying conclusion, in my opinion, during the final episode of the season, where, after seeing the rest of the ninja in danger, Kai is able to fully tap into his elemental powers, and he's able to completely melt Boreal. And in my opinion, that is one of the best Kai moments in the show. And overall, when it comes to the storyline that Kai got, I honestly feel like it was handled pretty well during the season. Like I said, there are some changes that I would have made to it, but by and large, like I said, I honestly feel like this is a pretty good storyline, and I think it is one of the better storylines that Kai has gotten when it comes to the show. Up next, we have Cole, and Cole didn't really get a storyline during the Fire chapter. However, he did get a storyline during the Ice chapter. And although I feel like the storyline didn't do that much when it comes to progressing Cole's character, I feel like the storyline did a really great job at demonstrating what Cole's character is all about. At the beginning of the Ice chapter, Cole ended up losing the Traveler's Tea, which is the thing that the ninja needed in order to get back to Ninjago. And when it comes to Cole, he felt incredibly guilty over losing the Traveler's Tea, and he wanted to do whatever he can in order to try and find more so the ninja could get back home. And once Cole learned about the Traveler's Tree, he went right there in order to try and get more Traveler's Tea. And in the process, he met Crag the Yeti. And initially, Cole thought that Crag was an enemy who was trying to hurt him. However, Cole ended up coming to the realization that Crag was actually a good guy who was trying to help him. And as a result of that, the two of them end up becoming friends, and Cole does whatever he can to help Crag. And like I said, I feel like this storyline does a really great job at demonstrating what Cole's character is all about. When it comes to Cole, overall, he's a really nice guy who wants to help people out. Whether that's his friends or people who he's just met, Cole overall is just a really good person who cares a lot about other people and wants to help them. And that's exactly what we see with Crag during the season. The two of them end up forming a friendship over the course of the season, and Cole does what he can in order to help Crag and be his friend. And personally, I thought that was honestly something pretty cool. And when it came to Cole and Crag's friendship, I thought it was handled pretty well during the season, plus at the same time it led to some genuinely funny moments during the Ice chapter. Plus, as a result of Cole and Crag's friendship, it allowed the ninja to travel back to Ninjago, because Crag ended up giving Cole a berry, which was the thing that the ninja needed to make the Traveler's Tea to travel back to Ninjago. And honestly, I think that was a really cool little detail, that this one small berry that Crag gave Cole was the thing that ultimately helped the ninja go back home in the first place. And overall, when it comes to Cole's storyline during the Ice chapter, I feel like it was handled pretty well. Like I said, this doesn't really do that much to progress Cole's character. However, I feel like the storyline does a really great job at showing what Cole's character is all about. Cole overall is a really nice guy who likes to help people out. Moving on, up next we have Zayn, and I honestly feel like Zayn was handled pretty well during the season. For starters, during the Fire chapter, we saw the return of Zayn's visions. Something that we haven't seen ever since Tournament of Elements, so I honestly really like that the season decided to bring back Zayn's visions. And that was already something pretty interesting, but then we get the Ice chapter. And during this season, we see Zayn become the Ice Emperor. And I really like this idea. I like the idea of a Ninjago season where one of the ninja is a major antagonist for the season. That's a really cool idea, and I like the fact that Zayn is the one who's the Ice Emperor, because Zayn is the ninja who is the least likely to turn to the side of evil. So him becoming the Ice Emperor, this evil warlord who took over the Netherrealm by force and plunged it into an eternal winter, is a really interesting idea. And I especially really like how this is set up during the season. During the episode The Explorers Club, we see Zayn, Lloyd, and Nia go into the Explorers Club, and while they're in it, they see a mirror. A mirror which shows them their worst fears. And when it comes to Zayn, he sees himself as nothing more than a machine. No humanity or soul at all, nothing but programming and code. And that's exactly what we see happen with Zayn during the Ice chapter. He basically becomes nothing more than a machine that's meant to follow orders. There's no humanity or soul at all. So again, I really like how this is set up. There's also one other detail about the Ice Emperor that I really like, and it's that we don't see the Ice Emperor that much during this season. And I feel like this works really well because it makes the moments where we do see the Ice Emperor a lot more effective. And I feel like these moments end up doing a really great job at making the Ice Emperor this intimidating and evil force who's ruling over the Neverrealm. Again, I thought that was handled pretty well. And finally, we have the Ice Emperor's defeat, and I feel like this was also handled pretty well. The Ice Emperor's defeat is directly tied into Lloyd's storyline during the season, which revolves around him trusting people, and as a result of Lloyd putting his trust into Zayn and also Vex saying the word protect, Zayn is able to remember who he is, and when it comes to that moment of Zayn remembering who he is, I honestly feel like that moment is really, really good. And after Zayn does remember everything, he ends up destroying the Scroll of Forbidden Spinjitzu, undoing everything he did as the Ice Emperor, and bringing the Neverrealm back to the way it was before the Eternal Winter happened. And I honestly feel like this defeat is handled pretty well overall. And overall, when it comes to Zayn during the season, I honestly feel like he was handled pretty well, and when it comes to the Ice Emperor storyline, I honestly feel like this was the first truly good Zayn storyline that we had gotten ever since Zayn's existential crisis during Season 4. And I'm also really glad that when it came to the book, Quest for the Lost Powers, that was released earlier this year, it finally gave us a proper conclusion to the Ice Emperor storyline. And I feel like that conclusion was also handled pretty well. Up next, we have Nia, and very similar to Cole, Nia didn't really get a storyline during the Fire chapter. However, she did get a storyline during the Ice chapter, and I honestly feel like it's handled pretty well. Like I said earlier, when Zayn, Lloyd, and Nia went to the Explorers Club, they looked in a mirror that showed them their worst fears. And when it came to Nia, she saw a version of herself who never unlocked her elemental powers, and she saw herself as an ordinary person. And in a way, we saw that happen during the Ice chapter. During the Ice chapter, all of the water in the Neverrealm was turned into either snow or ice, so Nia wasn't able to use her powers. That was until Sorla was able to help Nia realize that even though the water was turned into snow and ice, it's still water and Nia can still control it. And as a result of that, we end up seeing this storyline revolving around Nia learning how to control snow and ice. And I honestly think that is a really cool idea when it comes to Ninjago. An elemental master essentially learning how to control another elemental power. That's a pretty cool idea. And there's one thing about this storyline in particular that I really, really like. As Nia is learning to control snow and ice, she clearly struggles at learning this, and we see her fail multiple times. However, even though Nia is failing to learn about this new aspect about her powers, she keeps at it and she keeps on trying no matter what, showing that when it comes to her learning how to control snow and ice, this is something that she wants to do. She wants to find a way to learn about this brand new thing when it comes to her powers. And I honestly think that's something really cool when it comes to Nia. Even though she's struggling to learn this thing about her powers, she's not giving up no matter what. And this entire storyline ends up getting a pretty satisfying conclusion by the end of the season, in my opinion, with Nia using her powers to control some icicles, and she uses them in the fight against Boreal, and as a result of Nia controlling the icicles, she is able to deal some massive damage to Boreal during the fight. And overall, when it comes to this storyline that Nia got during the Ice chapter, I honestly feel like it's handled pretty well when it comes to the season, and I honestly feel like this is a pretty underrated storyline in general when it comes to Nia. And just like Kai, I honestly feel like this is one of the better storylines that Nia has gotten when it comes to the show. And then we have Lloyd, and in my opinion, Season 11 is where Lloyd was at his best. I really like what the season did with Lloyd. For starters, we have the Fire Chapter, and during the Fire Chapter, Lloyd is the one to convince the rest of the team that Sensei Wu was right about them being lazy, and they need to get their acts together in order to defeat Asphira. That is something pretty interesting, but then we have the Ice Chapter, and I love what the Ice Chapter did with Lloyd. During the events of the Oni trilogy, Lloyd ended up suffering a lot as a result of Harumi and Garmadon, and Lloyd went through a lot of trauma as a result of their actions. And by the end of Season 10, Lloyd had the ability to go with the first Spinjitzu Master to the Departed Realm in order to leave all that stuff behind. However, Lloyd chose to stay in Ninjago with his friends. And during the Ice Chapter, we see Lloyd confront the trauma that he went through during the Oni trilogy head on. During the events of the Ice Chapter, we see Lloyd process things like his trust issues, his negative outlook on the world, and his obsession surrounding his failures with Harumi. We see Lloyd open up about the stuff that he went through during the trilogy, and he talks about what happened to him and how he was affected by it. And during the season, Lloyd even admits that it feels good for him to get this stuff off his chest, showing that he's been bottling up his emotions for a really long time, but now that he's actually talking about that stuff, he admits that he feels good about it. And by the end of the season, we see Lloyd having overcome and healed from a lot of the stuff that he went through during the trilogy, with Lloyd putting his trust in other people and him having a much more positive outlook on the world. Plus, at the same time, this season also acts as a starting off point for a brand new storyline that Lloyd would go through for the remainder of the Wild Brain era of the show, and that was a storyline dedicated to him finally getting over Harumi and moving on from her. Like I said earlier, Harumi hurt Lloyd a lot during the events of the trilogy, and Lloyd suffered from a ton of trauma as a result of Harumi's actions. And during the season, Lloyd ends up talking about the stuff that Harumi put him through, and Lloyd is finally able to move on from that stuff. He takes the first steps necessary to finally getting over Harumi and moving on from her. And this is a storyline that we would see continue for the remainder of the Wild Brain era of the show, with this storyline being expanded upon in seasons 12, 13, and The Island. And overall, when it comes to Lloyd during this season, I honestly feel like he's handled really well. And the storyline that Lloyd gets during this season, I really enjoyed, because it feels like a natural continuation of the arc that Lloyd got during the Oni trilogy, while at the same time functioning as a really great starting point for a brand new storyline that we would see continue on for the remainder of the Wild Brain era. And overall, when it comes to Lloyd during the Ice Chapter and during Season 11 in general, I really liked him. Now, there are a couple of other things related to Lloyd's storyline during the season that I really liked, but I'm going to talk about that stuff later on during the video. Moving on from the ninja, let's talk about the other characters that we got during the season. And starting off with the returning characters, there isn't that much for me to say about them. Dareth was only in one episode, so I don't have that much to say about him. It was cool seeing Nelson back after all this time, but just like Dareth, he was only in one episode, so I don't really have a lot to say about him. Pixel didn't really get that much during the season. It was cool seeing her fight against the Preeminent, but that's really all I have to say. But there was one returning character during this season who I feel was honestly handled pretty well, and that was Wu. Now, when it comes to Wu during this season, this is another Something from My Past has returned to haunt me storyline that we've seen from Wu many times over the events of the show. However, I honestly really like what the season does with this storyline. After Kai loses his powers and the team fights against Asphira for a bit, the team heads back to the monastery, where they learn that Wu was the deceiver and he was the one responsible for teaching Asphira Spinjitzu in the first place. And when it comes to the ninja, they are understandably upset about this. However, when it comes to Kai, he in particular is really angry at this, and he actually calls out Sensei Wu on him doing stuff like this and him not telling the ninja about all this stuff. And I honestly really like that we actually see that when it comes to the show. For the most part, whenever we do get a something from my past has returned to haunt me storyline when it comes to Wu, something bad ends up happening and the ninja essentially just go with it. However, when it comes to this season, we actually see the ninja call out Sensei Wu on him not telling them about this stuff because something bad happened to them directly, with that obviously being Kai losing his powers. And when it comes to Wu, he ends up realizing that because he made a mistake in the past, it means that the ninja are the ones who had to pay for it, and they're the ones who are trying to fix his mistake. And as a result of that, we see Wu doing whatever he can in order to help out the ninja, so that way they don't get hurt because of something that he did in the past. That's the entire reason why he's so insistent on going to the Neverrealm by himself, also that way the rest of the ninja don't get hurt. And that's also the reason why he's really angry during the episode The Kaiju Protocol. He's trying to bring the ninja back home, so once again, they don't get hurt because of something that he did in the past. And I honestly really like the way the season handles Wu. It shows that when it comes to Wu, he is trying to make up for the stuff that he did in the past, and he doesn't want the ninja to get hurt. Because when it comes to the ninja and Wu, they're all essentially a found family. And when it comes to Wu, he doesn't want his family to get hurt, and he doesn't want them to pay for his mistakes. So overall, when it comes to Wu during this season, I honestly feel like he was handled pretty well during the season. Moving on to the new characters, for starters, we have the new characters that we got during the Fire chapter, and for the most part, I honestly didn't really like the new characters that we got during the Fire chapter, with Asphira being the only real exception. I think that Asphira's history with Sensei Wu is honestly something pretty interesting. Plus, I also like the fact that when it comes to Asphira, she's the first major villain in the show who knows Spinjitzu, who actively uses it against the ninja. I honestly think that's pretty cool. Plus, I also like the fact that when it comes to Asphira, she is the second major female antagonist when it comes to the show. Prior to Asphira, Harumi was the only other major female antagonist that we had gotten during the show. So again, I like the fact that when it comes to Asphira, she's another major female antagonist. And overall, when it comes to Asphira, I thought that she was alright during the season. Overall, though, I wasn't the biggest fan of Asphira, with her basically being a one-note villain, with her entire character just being revenge, and that's basically it. And to be completely honest with you guys, I actually liked her more during Crystallized than I did during this season, but I didn't think Asphira was that bad during the season. She was alright. And then moving on to the Ice chapter, I honestly really liked the new characters that we got during the Ice chapter. I feel like Kataru and Grimfax were both pretty solid characters when it came to the season. I really liked Crag. Like I said earlier, I liked his and Cole's friendship. Plus, I also like the fact that when it comes to Crag, he's a pretty comedic character, and as a result of him not talking, Crag's comedy is more physical comedy, and I thought it was pretty funny. I liked Sorla. I thought that her dynamic with Nia was handled pretty well. And to be completely honest with you guys, I actually think that Sorla is a better mentor and character than Mistake was. I talked about the Ice Emperor earlier, and I thought that he was handled pretty well. But now, let's talk about the main antagonist for the season, Vex. And in my opinion, Vex is one of the best Ninjago villains of all time. I really like Vex. For starters, we have his motivation and the reason why he's doing everything. And when it comes to Vex, the reason why he does all the stuff that he does during the Ice chapter is pretty interesting in comparison to other Ninjago villains. When it comes to a lot of other Ninjago villains, their main motivation ends up being stuff like power or revenge. But when it comes to Vex, his main motivation for doing everything is actually paranoia. Vex is extremely paranoid and fearful towards the world, and he only sees the worst in it, to the point that he went into self-exile because he believed that everyone hated him, when they didn't. And I think that's honestly something pretty interesting, because again, like I said, we've never really seen a Ninjago villain where their main motivation for doing everything is paranoia. I also think it's pretty interesting that when it comes to Vex, he's the one who turns Zayn into the Ice Emperor. And for the most part, when it comes to the season, it makes you believe that the Ice Emperor is the main antagonist of the season. That is, until it's revealed during the episode Corruption that Vex is the one who's really pulling the strings, and he's the one responsible for all this stuff, making him the true main antagonist of the Ice chapter. I think that's honestly something pretty interesting. I also really like how Vex ends up getting tied directly into Lloyd's trust storyline. Like I said earlier, when it came to Lloyd, Zayn, and Nia, they all looked into the mirror and they saw their worst fears. And when it came to Lloyd, when he looked into the mirror, he saw himself as Garmadon. He saw himself becoming like his dad. He saw himself becoming a villain. And when it comes to Vex, Vex is meant to be that exact thing. Vex is meant to be this dark reflection of Lloyd, showing what Lloyd could end up like if he gives into all of his paranoia and trust issues. However, unlike Zayn and Nia, who did in a way end up becoming their worst fears that they saw when they looked into the mirror, Lloyd didn't actually end up like that. As a result of Lloyd learning to see the good in the world again and overcoming his trust issues, Lloyd didn't end up like Vex. He didn't become a villain. There were moments where it looked like Lloyd might have turned to the dark side, but he didn't, and by the end of the season, as a result of Lloyd being able to overcome his trust issues, he didn't end up like Vex, which is something that I think is honestly pretty cool. And finally, one last thing that I really like about Vex is his defeat and his punishment. When it comes to Vex, his defeat is basically because of himself. As a result of Vex saying the word protect, Zayn remembered who he was, and Zayn undid everything that he did as the Ice Emperor, and Vex was defeated. And I honestly really like this. I like the idea that Vex is responsible for his own downfall, because it's something that we don't really see when it comes to Ninjago, villains being responsible for their own defeat. Plus, like I said earlier, this ties directly into Lloyd's trusting storyline, because as a result of Lloyd putting his trust in the Ice Emperor and Vex saying the word protect, it caused Zayn to remember everything, and thus, Vex was defeated. And when it comes to Vex's punishment, I feel like this was also handled pretty well. I honestly really like the idea of Vex being banished by the end of the season, because that's the exact same position that Vex was in before the events of the Ice chapter started. Remember, before everything happened, Vex went into self-exile because he believed that everyone hated him. However, after the events of the Ice chapter, and him having taken over the Netherrealm and plunging it into the Eternal Winter, Vex is going into exile because everyone does hate him now. When it comes to Vex, he essentially went into exile both times because of himself, and I honestly think that's something pretty interesting. And overall, when it comes to Vex, I honestly feel like he is a really great villain and character when it comes to the show. And like I said earlier, Vex is honestly one of my favorite Ninjago villains that we've gotten. And that's pretty much it when it comes to the new characters. However, you may have noticed that there was one new character that we got during the Ice chapter who I haven't talked about yet. And that's because I'm saving her for later on during the video. Moving on, up next I want to talk about the production value for the season, and I honestly feel like the production of the season is really good. For starters, we have the voice actors, and just like always, I feel like the voice actors did an absolutely amazing job when it came to the season. However, there are a couple of voice actors in particular who I really liked when it came to the season. For starters, we have Sam Vincent, and I feel like he did a really great job as Lloyd, and I feel like when it comes to this season, it gave us some of the best Lloyd lines that we've heard when it comes to the show, and I feel like Sam Vincent did a really great job voicing some of those lines. Up next, we have Tabitha St. Germain, and I think that she did an absolutely phenomenal job as Akita during the season. She was absolutely amazing. I really liked what Brent Miller did as the Ice Emperor. I thought he was absolutely incredible. And finally, we have the late, great Michael Kopsa, who was absolutely fantastic as Vex during the season. He was so great during the Ice chapter. Moving on from the voice actors, though, up next, let's talk about the music. And in my opinion, the music that we got during season 11, especially during the Ice chapter, was absolutely amazing. And I'd honestly make the argument that when it comes to this season, again with the Ice chapter in particular, this season arguably has the best soundtrack of any Ninjago season. And finally, that brings us to the animation, and I'm sure as you guys know, Season 11 was the starting point of the Wildbrain era of the show, with every season from Season 11 onward not being animated by Willfilm, but instead being animated by Wildbrain. And in my opinion, Wildbrain's animation is absolutely amazing. I feel like when it comes to Wildbrain's emphasis on squash and squish animation, it resulted in some really great moments when it came to the show, especially when it came to the fight scenes. The fight scenes and the fight choreography that we've gotten during the Wildbrain era of the show have been absolutely amazing, and they all started with this season. And honestly, when it comes to the fights that we did end up getting during the season, I feel like they were honestly really good. I especially really like the big Spinjitzu battle between the ninja and Asphira during the Fire chapter, especially since I'm someone who's been watching Ninjago ever since the beginning, and I honestly really like that finally in the show, we got a chance to see actual Spinjitzu battles happen. That was honestly really cool. I also feel like the lighting during the season was handled really well, especially when it comes to the Ice Emperor's throne room. Seriously, any scene that takes place in that throne room looks absolutely phenomenal, and the animation in general during the season, in my opinion, honestly looks really good. Speaking of animation, though, that brings me to something else that I want to talk about, and that would be the anime episodes. I'm sure as you guys know, during the events of Season 11, we got two episodes with a 2D art style, The Absolute Worst and Last of the Formlings. And I honestly think that when it comes to these two episodes, I think it's honestly a really creative idea to have episodes with a 2D art style. For the most part, when it comes to Ninjago, we've really only seen things with 3D animation. Occasionally, we have gotten segments of 2D animation in the show, like when it came to the flashback sequences that we got during the pilot season and at the very beginning of season 1, and also during the season 5 intro, for example. However, for the most part, like I said, normally when it comes to Ninjago, it's a 3D animated show. So I honestly think it's pretty interesting that when it came to the show, we got some episodes with a 2D animation style. Again, I think that's honestly a pretty creative idea. That being said, though, I do have very different opinions when it comes to both of these episodes. When it comes to the absolute worst, honestly, I think this was one of the worst episodes from the season. I think the concept is honestly pretty interesting, with it focusing on some criminals as they escape from Criterium Prison, and at the same time, they tell the stories of how they were captured by the ninja. I think that is honestly something pretty cool. However, I didn't think the episode was that good. You can tell that the episode is meant to be a comedic episode, however, I didn't think the episode was that funny. Also, when I watched the episode, it took some getting used to when it came to the character designs and also the expressions when it came to the characters. Although, to be fair, I don't watch anime, so that's probably why it took some getting used to for me. But again, overall, I wasn't the biggest fan of this episode. And then we have Last of the Formlings, which is one of the best episodes in the show. It is no secret that I love this episode, and I think that it is absolutely incredible. When it comes to just the visuals alone, I think this is the best Ninjago episode we have ever gotten because the animation looks really good in this episode. I love the story of this episode, the character work is incredible, the music is amazing, and overall when it comes to this episode, I think that it is absolutely incredible. And if you guys saw my video going over my 10 favorite Wildbrain episodes, then you guys would know that Last of the Formlings is my favorite Ice Chapter episode, but it's also my favorite episode of Season 11, and it's my favorite Wildbrain episode as a whole. This episode is absolutely amazing, and I think that it is really good. And overall, when it comes to the anime episodes, like I said, I feel like the idea of us getting episodes with a 2D art style is definitely a really creative idea for Ninjago. Although at the same time, like I said, I have very different opinions when it comes to these two episodes. Speaking of the episodes, that's something else that I want to talk about. I'm sure as you guys know, Season 11 was the starting off point of the 11-minute format, with the episodes no longer being 22 minutes, but instead the episodes were 11 minutes. And in my opinion, I think that the 11-minute format is actually pretty good. It's not perfect by any means, and I feel like there are definitely some areas where the 11-minute format could have been improved upon, but I feel like by and large, the 11-minute format is actually pretty good. And a big reason why I really like the 11-minute format is because of all the experimentation that we could get when it came to the episodes. With the episodes being 11 minutes long, it meant that we could get episodes that we would never normally be able to get with the 22-minute format. We could get episodes dedicated to backstories. We could have episodes dedicated to characters other than the ninja. And we could even have episodes that changes things up completely, like with the anime episodes. And overall, when it comes to the 11-minute format, I honestly think this was a pretty interesting idea when it came to the show. Plus, the episodes that we got during the season, for the most part, in my opinion, were pretty good. When it came to the Fire chapter, there were good episodes like Never Trust a Human, Under Siege, Vengeance is Mine, A Cold Goodbye, and more. And when it came to the Ice chapter, in my opinion, there is not a single episode that we got during the Ice chapter that I would consider to be less than great. I really like all of the episodes that we got during the Ice chapter, and I really enjoy each of these episodes for one reason or another. I already talked about Last of the Formlings and how much I like that episode, but there's two other episodes in particular when it comes to the Ice chapter that I really like. For starters, we have Secret of the Wolf. I feel like the character work that we see during that episode is really good. Plus, I think the massive fight scene between the Titan mech and the rock monster was absolutely amazing. And there was also the finale, Awakenings, which, in my opinion, is the best Wild Brain finale that we have gotten. The animation is really great, especially in the Ice Emperor's throne room. Like I said earlier, Vex's defeat and punishment is handled really well, and I feel like that episode did a really great job at wrapping up all the major storylines from the Ice chapter, and in some cases, Season 11, in a very satisfying way. And overall, when it came to the episodes, like I said, I feel like for the most part, they were honestly pretty good. There were some episodes that I didn't like as much, but I'm gonna get to those later on during the video. And finally, there's one last major positive that I want to talk about when it comes to Season 11, and if you guys have been watching my channel for a while, then you knew exactly what this was gonna be. For me personally, my favorite thing about Season 11 would easily have to be Akita. I think that Akita is an absolutely amazing character when it comes to the show, to the point where I made an entire video a while back talking about Akita, explaining why I think she's an amazing character. And by the way, I just want to quickly say this. Thank you all so much for the support on that video. That video means a lot to me, and I'm honestly really happy that you guys enjoyed the video. Again, thank you so much. And when it comes to Akita, even though she's only in 7 episodes of the season, I feel like when it comes to the stuff that we get during those episodes, it is absolutely incredible. For starters, I really like Akita's introduction that we get. I like the idea of her being in her wolf form the entire time. It adds this interesting layer of mystery to the scene. Plus, at the same time, it ties directly into Akita having trust issues, a storyline that she would go through for the rest of the Ice chapter. Plus, at the same time, combining Akita's introduction with the first scene where her and Lloyd meet each other, in my opinion, that was a really great idea. I think Akita's backstory is handled really well. I think that when it comes to Akita's backstory, it is the darkest and most tragic backstory of any character in the show, with everyone in Akita's home village being frozen and essentially killed by Vex, who was initially from the Formling village, including Akita's own twin brother Kataru, who sacrificed himself right in front of Akita, giving her the chance to live on. And when it came to Akita, she had to live on her own in the woods for years, where she ended up developing trust issues. Again, I feel like Akita's backstory is handled really well. I also like how it ends up paralleling Lloyd's situation towards the end of Season 8. Like I said earlier, I think that Akita's voice actress, Tabitha St. Germain, did an amazing job voicing Akita. I really like Akita's theme music. Like I said earlier, I think that Last of the Formlings is an amazing episode. I also really like the large role that Akita has during the Ice chapter, with her appearing in most of the episodes during the season, and I feel like you could honestly make the argument saying that when it comes to Akita, her and Lloyd are the main characters of the Ice chapter, with the two of them arguably having the largest roles of any of the characters in the Ice chapter. And speaking of Lloyd, her and Lloyd's dynamic and storyline that we see play out during the Ice chapter is absolutely amazing, and in my opinion, when it comes to Lloyd and Akita's story that we get, it is the best storyline that we have ever gotten when it comes to Ninjago. When it comes to the Lloyd and Akita storyline that we see play out during the events of the Ice chapter, it all revolves around Lloyd and Akita healing from the trauma they went through in the past and overcoming their trust issues. And there are a lot of things about the storyline that I personally really like, and I feel like there's a lot of things about the storyline that make it work as well as it does. For starters, we have all the similarities between Lloyd and Akita. When it comes to Lloyd and Akita, the two of them are very similar to each other in terms of personality and backstory, and I feel like this works really well when it comes to the story. When it comes to Lloyd and Akita having similar backstories, it means that the two of them can both relate to what the other person's gone through, because when it comes to both Lloyd and Akita, the two of them have trust issues because the two of them both believe they lost everyone who they were close to, and when it comes to their personalities, it means that the two of them can get along really well. I personally thought that was really good. Another thing about the Lloyd and Akita storyline that I really like is that at multiple points during the storyline, we end up seeing these moments happen between Lloyd and Akita that are parallels to moments that we saw between Lloyd and Harumi during Season 8. This is meant to show us that when it comes to the storyline that Lloyd and Akita are going through during the season, it's similar to the one that Lloyd and Harumi went through during Season 8. However, there are key differences showing us that this storyline isn't going to go the exact same way, and I do definitely really like that. Another thing about the storyline that I really like is that we get a chance to see how Lloyd and Akita affected each other over the course of the season. When it comes to Lloyd over the course of the season, we see him putting his trust in other people, and like I said, him putting his trust into Zayn is eventually what defeated the Ice Emperor, and by the end of the season, like I said, we see Lloyd taking the steps necessary to get over Harumi and move on from her, with Lloyd finally letting go of his obsession surrounding his failures with Harumi, which is a big thing that he was holding on to over the course of the season. And when it comes to Akita, over the course of the Ice chapter, we see her getting more comfortable showing her human form to other people, and by the end of the season, we see her letting go of the idea of revenge, something that she was holding on to during the events of the Ice chapter. However, the biggest reason why I really like Lloyd and Akita's storyline during the Ice chapter, and overall the big reason why I consider it to be Ninjago's best storyline, is the way that Lloyd and Akita confront their trauma and overcome their trust issues. When it comes to Lloyd and Akita, the way the two of them are able to confront their trauma during the season is by simply talking about it. For most of the time when it comes to Ninjago, we'll see characters going through these really traumatic events and these big things that should have some kind of effect on them. However, we don't really see what happens to the characters as a result of that stuff. Sometimes we do, like with Zayn's existential crisis during Season 4, for example. However, for the most part, we don't really see how these characters are affected by traumatic stuff they end up going through. However, when it comes to Lloyd and Akita, we do actually get a chance to see how they were affected by the traumatic stuff that they went through, and not just that, the two of them actually open up about the stuff that they went through and they talk about how they were affected by it. And as a result of the two of them talking to each other a lot over the course of the season, it allows the two of them to work through the trauma that they went through, eventually overcoming their trust issues and letting go of ideas that they've been holding on to all throughout the Ice chapter. And I personally think that's a really great idea when it comes to the season. Because again, I like this idea that when it comes to Lloyd and Akita, the two of them are opening up about the stuff that they went through in the past. Again, that's something that I really like. and I feel like when it comes to the Lloyd Nikita storyline, it comes to a very satisfying conclusion during the final episode of the season. Lloyd and Nikita's Ice Chapter storyline comes to an end during the final episode of Season 11, where right before Lloyd goes back to Ninjago, Akita gives Lloyd a kiss on the cheek. And in my opinion, this was the perfect way that Lloyd and Nikita's Ice Chapter storyline could have come to an end. For starters, like I said earlier, this scene is a recreation of a moment that we saw from Season 8, specifically when Harumi gave Lloyd a kiss on the cheek. However, there are some key differences. There are smaller ones like Lloyd's reaction and the camera angle. However, the biggest difference between this scene and the one during Season 8 is the reason why Lloyd is getting a kiss in the first place. When it comes to Harumi, she just gave Lloyd a kiss on the cheek as a way to distract and manipulate him. Meanwhile, when it comes to Akita, she actually cares about Lloyd and likes him a lot, and that's a detail that I liked. However, that's not all, because when it comes to this moment, it's actually a very big deal when it comes to both Lloyd and Akita. When it comes to this moment, it's meant to represent two big things. For starters, it's meant to represent Lloyd and Nikita's character development over the course of the season, with us seeing how much these two have grown over the events of the Ice Chapter. However, that's not all, because this moment is also meant to represent how close the two of them became over the course of the Ice Chapter. It's pretty obvious based on Lloyd and Nikita's interactions that the two of them have feelings for one another and they like each other. And when it comes to this moment, it's meant to represent just that. This moment is meant to represent Akita giving Lloyd a symbol of her love, and when it comes to Lloyd, it's meant to represent him taking comfort in his loved ones and the people who care about him, with Lloyd knowing that there are people out there who can and want to help him, and Akita is one of those people. And overall, I personally really like that. And then after Lloyd went back to Ninjago, we hear Akita narrating during the final moments of the episode, with her talking about Lloyd again, and she talks about seeing him again at some point, ending the season with the line, "Never is a very long time." And like I said, I feel like this is the best way that Lloyd and Nikita's Ice Chapter storyline could have ended, because it gives us a moment that, in my opinion, perfectly represents Lloyd and Nikita's growth over the season, while at the same time setting up the idea of Akita returning and her and Lloyd reuniting at some point during the future. And given the stuff that we've seen when it comes to Dragons Rising, that day might be coming sooner than we all think. And finally, there's one more detail about the Lloyd and Nikita storyline that I really like, and it's a detail that I feel like not a lot of Ninjago fans realize actually. And it's that the Lloyd and Nikita storyline is essentially the entire point of the Ice Chapter and the reason why it exists. When it comes to the Ice Chapter, the main story of this season mostly revolves around Lloyd and Nikita overcoming their trust issues. There is also other stuff going on, like when it comes to the Ninja and Vex. However, a majority of the story revolves around Lloyd and Nikita overcoming their trauma. And when it comes to the Ice Chapter, it's essentially meant to act as a conclusion to Lloyd's arc that we saw play out during the events of the Oni trilogy, while at the same time acting as a starting off point for Lloyd's Wild Brain character arc. Everything started during the Ice Chapter, and again, it's the reason why it exists in the first place. It's to conclude Lloyd's Oni trilogy arc while setting up a brand new arc. The Akita stuff is also important, however, when it comes to the Ice Chapter, it is mainly stuff revolving around Lloyd overcoming his trauma. That's the entire reason why the storyline exists, to conclude one story while at the same time setting up a brand new storyline, which is something that I think is honestly pretty interesting. And overall, when it comes to the Lloyd and Nikita storyline that we got during the Ice Chapter, like I said, I love it. I think that it is absolutely amazing and incredible. And when it comes to the story, like I said, I think that it is the best storyline that we've ever seen when it comes to Ninjago. Lloyd and Nikita are both absolutely amazing characters, and I really like what the story ends up doing to both of their characters over the course of the Ice Chapter. It is absolutely incredible. And when it comes to Akita in general, like I said earlier, she is one of my absolute favorite characters when it comes to the show. In fact, at this point, her and Zayn are actually both tied for being my overall favorite Ninjago characters. So yeah, overall when it comes to Akita, I really like her. And that's pretty much it when it comes to all the positives that I have to say for Season 11. So now let's talk about the stuff that I didn't like. So for starters, we have the new characters that we got during the Fire chapter. Like I said, I wasn't really a big fan of the new characters that we got during the Fire chapter, with Asphira being the only real exception, and even then I didn't think she was that great overall. But when it comes to all the other characters, honestly, I didn't really like them. I thought that Char overall was a pretty annoying character and I didn't really like him that much. I get the idea that when it comes to clutch powers, he's meant to be this character who we aren't supposed to like. However, I feel like the writers did too good of a job at making him an unlikable character because I really don't like clutch powers when it comes to the show. I think that Antonia overall is okay. When it comes to Antonia, she's essentially meant to act as this person for Nelson to look up to, and I feel like in the show she does a good job at that. However, when it comes to Antonia, I think that overall she's a pretty boring character with nothing that interesting about her. And when it comes to the episodes that focus on her and Nelson, those end up being some of my least favorite episodes when it comes to the seasons that they're a part of. I think the concept for those episodes is honestly pretty interesting, with those episodes essentially meant to serve as civilian perspectives on Ninjago attacks. I think that's pretty cool. However, the episodes themselves honestly aren't that interesting in my opinion. And then we have Fugidove. Fugidove was only in one episode of the season, but in my opinion, Fugidove is one of the most annoying and obnoxious characters in the show. He was not funny during the episode that he was a part of, with that being the absolute worst, and honestly, Fugidove is a big reason why I don't like the episode The Absolute Worst, because of how obnoxious he is. Now, I get that when it comes to Fugidove, he's essentially meant to be the evil version of Dareth, with the two of them both making themselves out to be this really big deal, but in actuality, they aren't. However, when it comes to Dareth, I feel like for the most part, he is pretty funny. Meanwhile, when it comes to Fugidove, he isn't. He got like one laugh out of me during the episode The Absolute Worst, and that was pretty much it. But for the most part, I think he's honestly a really annoying character when it comes to the show. And overall, I think that Fugidove is one of the worst characters in all of Ninjago. Another issue that I have when it comes to Season 11 would be the pacing of the Fire chapter. For the first half of the Fire chapter, it felt like the season was constantly going back and forth between plot-related stuff and not plot-related stuff. For the first three episodes, it felt like we were getting consistent plot-related stuff with the ninja trying to go on a quest, but then in episode 4, we saw the ninja trying to get a part for their vehicles. We then had an episode dedicated to the ninja going into the Pyro Viper tomb with clutch powers and eventually releasing Asphira. We then had an episode dedicated to Nelson and Antonia in Ninjago City. We then had an episode dedicated to the ninja trying to escape from the Pyro Viper tomb. We then had an episode dedicated to in-universe news broadcasts. We then had an episode dedicated to Kai's Powerless storyline, and I feel like from the episode Powerless onward, that's when we got consistent plot-related stuff when it came to the Fire chapter. However, when it came to the first half of the Fire chapter, like I said, it felt like the season was constantly going back and forth between focusing on plot-related stuff and not plot-related stuff. So when it came to the Fire chapter, it felt like there wasn't that much plot going on until about halfway through the season, which is something that I wasn't the biggest fan of. Plus, at the same time, when it came to the episodes that didn't focus on plot-related stuff, I honestly didn't think they were that great overall. When it came to episode 4, I thought that episode was alright. It had some good animation, and the fight scenes were definitely pretty cool, but other than that, I don't have that much to say when it comes to the episode. Like I said earlier, when it comes to the Nelson and Antonia episodes, I honestly think they're kind of boring. And when it comes to Snake Catastrophe, I think that Snake Catastrophe is the worst episode of Season 11. I honestly wasn't a fan of the in-universe news broadcasts. I wasn't really that big a fan of the way the characters were handled during the episode, and the episode overall honestly felt pretty boring. So overall, I really didn't like it. So again, like I said, when it came to the pacing of the first half of the Fire chapter, I wasn't really a big fan of that. However, that wasn't the only pacing issue that I had with the season, because there was another pacing issue that I had during the Ice chapter. Now, I don't think that the Ice chapter had any pacing issues. I feel like the Ice chapter did a good job at focusing on the things that it needs to focus on, but when it came to the pacing issue that I had, that was the Ice chapter being interrupted by Fire chapter episodes twice. Specifically, on two different occasions during the Ice chapter, the episodes were interrupted by the Absolute Worst and the Kaiju Protocol. And honestly, I wasn't really a big fan of that, mainly because when it came to these episodes, it felt like they took away from the storyline that we were being told during the Ice chapter. Now, when it comes to these episodes, they focus on stuff that's happening in Ninjago while the ninja are in the Neverrealm, and I feel like that does make sense, showing us stuff that's going on in Ninjago while the ninja aren't there. However, their placement honestly feels really strange, mainly because when it comes to both of these episodes, they're put right in between major story moments that are happening when it comes to the Ice chapter. So it feels pretty weird that we're seeing these major things happening during the Ice chapter, but then we're cutting away and seeing stuff that's going on back in Ninjago. Again, it feels pretty weird. Plus, like when it came to the Fire chapter episodes that didn't focus on the plot that much, the episodes that we do get honestly weren't that good in my opinion. Like I said earlier, when it comes to the Absolute Worst, I'm not the biggest fan of this episode. And when it comes to the episode The Kaiju Protocol, I thought it was okay. The fight where Pixel goes up against the Preeminent was kind of cool, and I did like the woo stuff, but overall, I don't think the episode is that great, honestly. Again, I thought it was okay. And again, it felt pretty weird that we got major plot related stuff going on when it came to the Ice chapter, but then the season cut away and we were focusing on stuff that was going on in Ninjago. Again, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, and this is also a big reason why I only consider the Ice chapter to be 13 episodes long, because when it comes to those two episodes, they don't really have a lot to do with the Ice chapter, so whenever I do see the Ice chapter, I just skip over those episodes. So again, when it comes to the pacing of the season, it felt pretty weird during the first half of the Fire chapter, and two Fire chapter episodes interrupting Ice chapter stuff is something that I wasn't the biggest fan of when it came to the season. And finally, there's one last issue that I have when it comes to the season, and it is my biggest issue that I have with Season 11, with that being the Lazy Ninja storyline. I don't think the Lazy Ninja storyline was handled well at all when it came to Season 11. For starters, when it came to the season, it revealed that when it came to the ninja after the defeat of the Oni during Season 10, the ninja had apparently become lazy, which, to be fair, is something that we've seen before when it comes to the show. That's the exact same thing that we saw at the very beginning of Season 1. After the ninja got the golden weapons, they had become lazy. However, when it comes to Season 11, it reveals that apparently the ninja were lazy for 6 months. And that doesn't make a lot of sense in my opinion. Both when it comes to the ninja being lazy for half a year, but also all of the ninja being lazy for 6 months. That doesn't make a lot of sense in my opinion. I can understand some of the ninja becoming lazy after the defeat of the Oni. A ninja like Jay and Kai, for example, I can understand them becoming lazy. However, when it comes to ninja like Zayn and Lloyd, I don't really see the two of them becoming lazy after what happened during Season 10. It doesn't make a lot of sense in my opinion. However, that's not it, because the Lazy Ninja storyline is dragged out for half of the Fire chapter. For the first few episodes we see when it comes to the Fire chapter, we are constantly seeing stuff revolving around the ninja being lazy, and the entire storyline ends up coming to an end during the episode Ninja vs. Lava, where, like I said earlier in the video, Lloyd told the ninja that Sensei Wu was right about them and they had become lazy. And here's my question: why did the Lazy Ninja storyline go on for this long? It didn't really make a lot of sense, in my opinion, for this thing to be dragged out for about half of the Fire chapter. I feel like if when it came to the storyline, it was more similar to Season 1, it probably would have worked better. Like, here's an example of what I'm talking about. If the season revealed that the ninja had been lazy for a few weeks to 1 month at most, I feel like that would have made a lot more sense. And when it comes to the episodes, I feel like having the ninja being lazy for about 2 to 3 episodes once again would have made a lot more sense. Because the ninja being lazy for 6 months and then the storyline being dragged out for half of the Fire chapter doesn't make a lot of sense. And like I said earlier, having all the ninja become lazy over the course of 6 months doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like I said, I can understand some of the ninja being lazy, but all of them becoming lazy, that doesn't make a lot of sense in my opinion. And overall, like I said, when it came to the Lazy Ninja storyline, this was my personal least favorite part of Season 11 because it really doesn't make a lot of sense. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I personally think that Season 11 is a really great season, and I feel like there's genuinely a lot of really good things about this season. There are definitely problems that I have when it comes to the season, however, those are more so issues that I have with the Fire chapter, and the only real problem that I have when it comes to the Ice chapter is Jay not getting a storyline during it. Although, like I said, the next season, Prime Empire, is Jay's focus season, so I don't really have a problem with Jay not having a storyline. Plus, to be fair, Jay also didn't really have a storyline during the Fire chapter either, so like I said, I don't really have a big problem with this. But overall, when it comes to the season, like I said, I feel like there's honestly a lot of really good things about the season. When it comes to the ninja who do get storylines, I feel like all their storylines are handled pretty well. I think the animation is really good. I honestly really like the 11-minute format because it allows for a lot more creativity when it comes to episodes. I really liked a lot of the new characters that we got during the Ice chapter, and like I said, I think that the Lloyd Nikita storyline is the best storyline that we've ever seen when it comes to Ninjago. So overall, when it comes to Season 11, I personally really like this season, and I think it's honestly a really underrated season when it comes to the show. Like I said, there are some problems that I have with it, but overall, I think this season is honestly really good, and as a starting point for the Wildbrain era of the show, I feel like it does a really great job setting up the stuff that we would see play out later on during this era of the show. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys. So tell me down below what do you guys think? Tell me, what are some things that you guys like when it comes to Season 11? Tell me down below, and I hope you guys enjoy. Later, guys. This is Dimension Master Studios, signing off.